It is good to have you back on board with us. Another episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here. And right now, officially, this will go down as episode number 301 in your scorecard. You can jump on board 24/7, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. Artist formerly known as Twitter, X, if you will, at Casey Stern or at Unfiltered with Casey Stern on Instagram or on YouTube. My guest today, good friend, longtime visitor of this show, which we appreciate. He is the host of Power Alley Monday through Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern, and you can find him on the front office Sundays as well on MLB Network Radio and often on your televisions without makeup, I promise, courtesy of SNY. My guy, Jim Duquette. Duke, appreciate you, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well. If I'm on with makeup, it's self-application and it's not pretty.
Okay, now are you carrying with the pocket? I don't even know what they call that. The flip over, like powdering.
The powder. The one problem I do have is I do have glare issues, so I got to have a little powder to keep that glare from blinding the audience when they're watching.
That's okay. This is the secret sauce behind the scenes that people don't understand. We're going to get into a ton of baseball today, as always represented by our good friends at BetOnline, number one source for your summer sports, MLB, golf, NBA, NHL playoffs, latest stats, news, and scores available from your favorite teams, odds and lines, team matchups, props, and odds in every sport out there. So get over to the website today. Use your mobile device to get in on the action. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Let me get started here, because as we do this here on a Tuesday, last night, Edwin Diaz, rough go at the end of the game. We'll get into the Mets side, but the Phillies on the other end of that, Stott with a homer, then a sac fly, another win, best record in the sport. I know it's a long season. We both know it's a long season. How much are you believing in Philadelphia right now, Duke?
I believe in Philly. It's hard not to. I mean, this is their window right now. The last two seasons we saw it. Last year was a disappointment. They ended. They really should have won that NLCS. They had a 3-2 lead against the Diamondbacks. They lost 2 at home, which is almost unheard of during this era right now. I mean, the Citizens Bank Park was so difficult to play in. But I think for me the biggest question that I had with them, not whether they were a good team, but could they get off to a good start, right? The last 2 seasons, they have been slow to get rolling out of the gate, and they've given the Braves a pretty comfortable lead in the first 2 months of the season. In fact, it cost Joe Girardi his job 2 years ago. So, this year, my feeling was, geez, if they could keep this thing close early, that might be the impetus for them to kind of be able to stay with the Braves and maybe even win the division over Atlanta, although still not sure that'll happen. But they're off to a great start lately. I think they've won 14 of 17. And everything that you're seeing with them is kind of coming together at one time. The defense, the starting pitching in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. And I think that even their bullpen, I'm not a big fan of Alvarado as the closer. Guy can scatter it with the best of them, but I mean, he's been good so far. I think that's the one area they'll have to address.
Yeah, and we know the way that their manager likes to ride the bullpen and deal with that in the postseason. They're going to need depth there. Those are issues. But to your point, they've had to battle at the end to then fight to get in and then be this built postseason team. They look now built regular season. I'm also with you, Duke. I'm not putting out the Braves to pasture. They've got plenty of talent, certainly. And Alex Anthopoulos knows a thing or two about adding at the deadline. So we'll see what happens with that. I want to get to the other side with the Mets while we're on that topic. And let's start with the Edwin Diaz side of it. Did anybody actually expect, I think because it wasn't a pitching injury and because it wasn't Tommy John, that people thought, well, there's the same Edwin Diaz just going to come back right away. Are you surprised at all that there are some hiccups here to the beginning of the return of Edwin Diaz, who hasn't been terrible, but hasn't been perfect?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, when you miss a full season, whether it's an elbow or it's a knee, the knee in particular, it's not obviously an arm injury, but it does impact your ability, obviously with the push off or the landing knee, like any of those things that, you kind of, and if you go back, it was that unbelievable season that he had 2 years ago where everything was working perfectly. His delivery was so efficient that he was, throwing, darts at 99 miles an hour with a swing and miss slider. And we saw a strikeout rate. It was, I think tops in the game or second best in the game, strikeouts per nine. And he was just filthy and dominant, got the huge contract. So, but, with that injury, I expected early on that you would see some hiccups. I'm not, I think overall he's pitched well. It's
Yeah.
not what we expected maybe, or what we saw rather 2 years ago. So, I think there's times where he doesn't look like he has confidence in the fastball, and he's going all breaking stuff. Then there's nights where the slider doesn't have that sharp break. It's just, every night, every other outing or every third outing, he has something else that's kind of causing him from being perfect. But I think he'll figure it out. I'm not overly concerned at this point.
When this season began with the Mets and people were freaking out when they went 0-5, 0-6, whatever the heck it was, right? I remember saying they're not going to go 0-162. They're going to be better than this. But the terrible part about rooting for mediocre teams as a fan, and I've been a fan of plenty of them, and so have you, is they will win 8 out of 10, then they will lose 7 out of 9. Then they will win 6 out of 7. This is what they do. And at the end of the year, you feel like you're more manic as a fan and probably as a GM for a 500 team than you do for a bad team because the direction is long, or for a great team who is headed towards the postseason. Are the Mets to you so far kind of as advertised, or are they underperforming for what you thought they would be here out of the gates now 6 weeks in?
See, I think they're right where I thought they would be. Let's just say Kodai Senga was healthy, they might be a little better,
Fair.
right?
Facts.
But
Yes.
outside of that, I was glad they picked up JD Martinez, and he's been fantastic since he's been back. I know there's always hiccups there, but I think he's hitting over 300 since he's returned, right? So, or since he joined the team. So, I think that like their rotation in some ways is a little bit better than I thought because of the injuries. Bullpen, listen, Rayleigh being out for a while, and who knows, like that's a major injury. The offense wasn't really all that strong there for a while. Lindor was off to a terrible start. So to be where they are with all of those early season struggles, I'm like, geez, maybe they're even a little better than I thought record wise. But I think in the end of the day, they're competitive. David Stearns, the president of baseball operations, said, he thinks they're a postseason team. I don't see that. Yet they're going to have to absolutely upgrade this roster for them to get to the postseason. But I feel like they're about where they should be, considering all these early season injuries.
And I'll use that kind of transition of about where they should be. For years, two teams in two central divisions were where they should be at the top because of the culture they'd built. We had Terry Francona, and we loved Tito, and Chris Antonetti, and that group from Mark Shapiro initially when they were the Indians into the Guardians, where every year they're just going to be better than you think. And then you mentioned David Stearns, and we think about the group with the Brewers and Craig Counsell, and every year they're going to be better than you think. But now there's no Tito. He's gone. David Stearns is not in Milwaukee. He's gone. Craig Counsell is in Chicago. And I'm looking up at the standings. And if you take me out of a time machine, and here we are, I'm thinking, is this 2016, 2019, 2021? How are the Brewers and the Guardians where they always are when the guys who we thought were at the helm of all of that, and Terry Francona and Craig Counsell, aren't even there anymore?
Yeah. I don't know how they're doing it, because if you looked at Milwaukee, I was in both of their spring training camps, and I didn't think they had much of a winter at all. In fact, they traded their best starting pitcher, Milwaukee did, in Corbin Burns. The next one has been injured. He's out the whole year, Brandon Woodruff.
Woodruff,
right? They had
Bieber's out on the other side.
Yeah, right. I mean, at the other end of the closer, Devin Williams, at the end of spring training got injured, right?
Yep.
Then Bieber in Cleveland, he's
gone.
Out.
Yep.
But they did, when I say nothing, they did like Austin Hedges. They signed a backup catcher. That's what the Guardians did. And they got a brand new manager. Like you said, Hall of Famer versus new manager. And Stephen Vogt's
we all love Stephen Vogt, sure.
Buddy of mine too, right? Like we love him. But what he and Pat Murphy have done, the organization's done, is incredible to me where they are right now.
Yeah, I can't. I couldn't have depicted either of those things, and I can't figure out, like, I want to say there's no sustainability in it even for the rest of the season because you look at, okay, well, the Twins, the 6 straight series wins, they had the big long streak. And, they'll probably, you got teams in that AL Central who would be more active at the deadline seemingly than Cleveland. And then on the NL side, when you look at, Chicago, who's right there, and you think about St. Louis and maybe Pittsburgh, and, you certainly got some teams there who seemingly would have more to be active at the deadline. But I look at it and I say, I'm not going to be surprised. Like if I look up on September 15th and both of these teams got a chance to be in the playoffs. I mean, when you look at the Central divisions, is it going to shock you at all that you're sitting there in a postseason watching both of these teams in again?
No, no. I mean that division. No, listen, I think the NL Central is stronger.
Yes.
Than it was last year, certainly. And I think the AL Central is stronger this year too. When you look at what Kansas City's done and Detroit has done, Pittsburgh's better in the NL. Cardinals will see. They were trending in the wrong direction over the weekend. Now they've won 2 in a row, but they had lost 7 in a row. But I do think that. The one thing interestingly with Cleveland, 2 years ago they were really good, youngest team in the sport, and they had a down year. Most of those guys did last year, and the front office basically said, you know what, we're going to double down. We're going to give each of those young hitters in particular a chance to rebound, and for the most part, they have. That was their philosophy. Because I remember asking Chris Antonetti, their president, why go back with the same team that struggled? You didn't add anything. He goes, well, we believed in them. We want, and we're still the 3rd youngest in the sport. So, it's really about understanding your personnel. I don't think anyone does it better than Cleveland. I don't think anyone does it better than Milwaukee. Milwaukee's got a really young offense right now. And I can't believe how they're scoring runs on a nightly basis and how good their offense has been all season.
Let me stay in the Central for another moment in the NL Central with the Pirates, who, I said this the other day and tweeted, or I don't even see, will you X this out? I posted this out.
Posted.
I mean, I don't even.
You posted.
Yeah, yes. I mean, seriously, really. But I feel so good for the city of Pittsburgh. I love that park. I love that fan base, and they deserve the enjoyment and the excitement. Now, I fear years down the road, if Skenes is as good as he seems to be, where we are, having some kind of like a podium where he's been traded because he refused to sign. So, this isn't going to last forever. But we got a guy with a splinker, a pitch no one's ever seen, where he's got like he's got all this ability. Does he remind you of anybody specifically? I mean, you see so many pictures. I mean, what's your take on kind of what you saw at Skenes, not only just in his debut, but as kind of we've gone through the lead up here of a guy who, assuming he stays healthy, knock on wood, could be a premier pitcher for a long period of time now.
Yeah, the splinker that you talked about, it's such a rare pitch. There's only one other guy that has that combination of a pitch of sinker splitter. It's Yohan Duran with the Twins. Those are the only 2 in the sport that have that pitch that acts, a sinker that acts like a splitter. And interestingly, Wes Johnson, who was his pitching coach at LSU, also had Yohan Duran in Minnesota. Yeah, like it's the most rare thing ever. And he came on MLB Network Radio the other day. He said, "Listen, that Skenes asked him about that pitch, and he goes, if you can throw it, it's a great pitch. Basically embrace it and keep throwing it." And so I can't think of another guy who outside of Duran who throws like that. The arm angle is a little different. We don't usually see that as a starter. Everyone makes the comparison to Strasburg, but it's only in the sense that he got to the big league so fast and he's high profile and everything else. The stuff, the arm delivery, that's all different. There's really not many guys that kind of have that 3/4 deliveries kind of, and really has that kind of sweeping pitches. He's got 4 pitches that he's willing to throw. So this is so unique, but really cool. Like you said in Pittsburgh, like that scene on Saturday was amazing.
It reminded me of the Cueto chants, right? I mean, you go back to the first I'll never forget that because I remember in covering, everybody hated the wild card was going to be the stupidest thing ever. This 1-game thing was the dumbest idea that's ever happened. And then people saw that environment in Pittsburgh in that first year and were like, wow, that's the craziest thing we've ever seen. That was like Game 7 of a World Series in that park. And, it hasn't been much of that since, unfortunately. I remember you and I there covering the All-Star game and thinking this is now the beginning of welcome back to Pittsburgh. And Yeah,
Yeah,
but maybe who knows? For the Dodgers, their expectations certainly way higher. And I'll go back to something you said about Edwin Diaz and kind of tie it in here because you're right. Edwin Diaz has not been bad, but when you come off as a season like Edwin Diaz had, it's like when Jake Arrieta came off in the next year after half a year that to me still is in my time covering the game the best single half of a season I've ever seen pitched. In that back
sure.
half of that year, I've never seen anything like that before. But when he came in the next year, it's like, how are you going to top that? Edwin Diaz, how are you going to top that? When you're the Dodgers and you have this level of talent, anything outside of like 140 and 22 record is going to be a disappointment pretty
Right.
much. So you've got a lot of people who are out there looking and running to write Duke that the Dodgers are a disappointment, that they've underperformed, that they're not as dominant as we thought. How do you judge what you've seen 7 weeks, whatever it is, into the season from LA?
Well, I would say this early on, their lineup was very top heavy, right? So the top four guys, if you could pitch around them, which the Mets really did, like the Mets caught them perfectly. They won 2 of 3 out in a Dodger Stadium because they kept walking the top guys. And then, Teoscar Hernandez coming up in the cleanup spot, they were taking care of him, striking him out. Will Smith had at least a day off. And, with Will Smith in the lineup, it's a little bit better. Teoscar, when he's swinging the bat well, can be really tough. I think we just haven't seen that offense, although I feel like it's starting to perk up. I think, interestingly, after beating the Giants last night, they've now won 16 of 20. So they've done it quietly. And so, when they go on those runs, you're like, oh, how the heck did they get 100 wins? Well, they had these massive, winning streaks or trends that 16 to 20, that not many teams can do that. So I still think in the end, they're going to be, close to 100 wins. The hard part with them now is they have those questions at the bottom of the lineup. They were worst, I think, in offense. They were bottom third of the lineup. We're not used to seeing that. And then the other thing is, their starting pitching is still in flux. I know Buehler's been back for 2 starts, but it hasn't looked good. And Kershaw's still out, and Bobby Miller, their top starter, has been out on the IL. So, the last couple of seasons, they've had an inordinate amount of injuries to their starters. That's why they got tripped up in the postseason. If they can get that together somehow, I still think they're going to be a force.
I want to stay out in the National League West because even though they're only sitting at 22 and 22, and I wanted to get their record even, so I looked it up. The Padres have won a couple series against the Dodgers. They're a team who has been in a spot where they've had so many expectations and such a disappointment and all the different changes that people cut on them a little bit.
Yeah.
And they've got names in that rotation that, if healthy and if continue to kind of get better as the season goes on, can be dangerous. Talk about Philadelphia, right? You get in, look at what they are in a postseason. You look at the names that San Diego can put up there if they get into a postseason. Are the Padres kind of I don't want to say a sleeping giant, but are they a sleeping problem maybe for some teams in the National League as this season wears on? Because I look at them and I say, okay, I know people are hard on them out in San Diego, but if I'm looking at it from the outside looking in, this is a team that's in a spot where they can really kind of be a dangerous club as the season goes on. You buying into that?
Yeah, I am. They're doing it in a lot different way, right? They threw a lot of money at issues the last 2 seasons. They underperformed, and then AJ Preller, with the passing of Peter Seidler, their owner, he was asked to cut his payroll by 90 million. That's almost unheard of. To be able to do that, flip the roster around, save money, still stay competitive. He did it. Part of that was trading Soto. His farm system is really strong. That's why he went out and traded for Dylan Cease and Luis Ariz. Like, you look at what he's done in the last month and a half, upgrading top starter, one of the best hitters. Like, that's the thing that is scary about the Padres is, Preller's going to be really aggressive on the trade front. And, I think he added 2 really significant pieces to a team that, maybe was 500 at the time, but now I think they're better than that. And I'm really curious. They got to get Musgrove back. He just went on the injured list. That's going to hurt. For a little while. His last start was good before he went on the injured list. But Darvish looks good coming back off the IL. Michael King, is a big arm that they traded for from the Yankees in the Soto deal. So, I like some of the things they do a really good job with their bullpen year in and year out. So, yeah, I have less question marks about the Padres today than I did back in February before the spring started.
Two more for you. One on a team, and then I got to hit umpiring before we get out because how can I not? So, um, the Astros. I
Yes.
sit there and I look at the fact that the Red Sox and the job that Alex Cora has done, by the way, and the feed, which nobody's going to talk about, the fact they're above 500. I mean, the spot he's putting himself into, a guy we both like personally and
Yeah.
professionally, is a really good spot to be put into because he's managing his ass off.
Yeah.
The fact that the A's, speaking of which, are sitting there and they've won 19 games, and then you look at it, you're like, well, how has Houston been like this? And it'd been kind of more 500 since the terrible start, 7-17, whatever the heck it was. A lot of pitching injuries at the beginning at the front end, right? Didn't have Verlander. Valdez was down. We understand all of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
The back end of the bullpen, the 7-8-9, we thought would be brilliant. All had ERAs of like 6-7 out of the gates. Those are things that you figure will, and they're starting to little by little,
Yeah.
kind of even
Yeah.
themselves out. The division has not run away from them. What are you telling an Astros fan who's calling you up, and they very well might here in a couple hours, and saying, hey, Duke, my chances still legit? I mean, how are you feeling about the Astros now? Despite the record, are they still in this thing at this
Well,
point?
I think you can never rule them out. I think that's the one thing with the track record here, since 2017, how good they've been. And they know and find ways to win. I'm not betting against that group at all. There are some inherent issues. You touched on all of them early on, and you do expect those kind of star players to perform. I will say this: it had a little feel like the Mets last year. Like, oh, we have all these high expectations. You got these star players. You're spending a lot of money, and they had injuries out of the gate, and they never could get firing. They looked like they'd start. Okay, here they come, and they fall back. It has a little feel like the Astros. Astros played better, then they fell back. Now they're playing better again. They just have to find that run that is not easy to do, and it's going to have to come with their starting pitching and their bullpen. I really that's where that has to come from. That internal, let's say the depth that they hadn't really shown. They got to get Christian Javier back on track. He's just off the injured list too. You touched on some of those other injuries, so I'm not ruling them out. And I think the biggest key there, which is the difference with the Mets, was all right. Braves just ran away with the division there. Yes, no one has run away from the division here. Rangers, Mariners, a game or two over 500. So that, I think, gives you hope that they can still catch those two teams there, later in the summer.
I've been sitting here trying to think about this as the season has wore on, and it's only 6-7 weeks in, and I'm thinking to myself, in all the years, am I now a victim of something I would yell at a fan for doing, and that is being so irrational in a moment that we don't realize it's always been this way. Let me backtrack.
Right.
Umpiring has been so bad in so many different ways, but we've been complaining about that for years. It's why there's been talk about robots. It's why we've had so many problems with the replay system, why the replay system came into play in the first place, and all of that. So is it getting worse? Are we just getting smarter and more apt to social media in terms of the quick nature in which we're seeing the mistakes? How are you kind of from and more so from a level of being in a front office when you kind of look down on it? How are you judging the umpiring now versus the past? Is it as bad as it seems to be from my two eyes and my vantage point?
I feel like the issues that we've had are the same issues that we've had for 10 years. We haven't seen any change at all. Like if we had seen, a couple of umpires that we all know are bad. Listen, I helped coach a 12U team, right? They know the two worst umpires in the major leagues. Now, that seems absurd to me that 12-year-old would know
Now, is this
Angel
Angel
Hernandez.
Hernandez and CB Buckner?
Yes, they know
Okay, fair
both
enough.
of their names. And it's
Okay.
just crazy.
Do they have Laz Diaz as their third? Because I don't.
I don't
Go
know
ahead.
if they know Laz.
Go
I'll
ahead.
ask them.
Okay, go
But
ahead.
they
Yeah.
know those two.
Yeah.
Like they will, when an umpire makes a bad call in their game, like okay, they start calling out Angel Hernandez's
Oh,
name.
that's
Like
fantastic.
it's bad.
That's
It's
fantastic.
funny, but it's bad.
It's funny. It's
So you
fantastic.
think about how
That's
that hasn't
fantastic.
changed at all in the
Yeah,
league.
that's great.
And then I do think that with some of these websites that give you the scorecards of the umpires in their strikes and balls, and how accurate they are and how many missed calls they had and the effect. Like I think there are better ways to evaluate these umpires and to see how calls change the game. Like I've been saying this, you and I have been talking about this forever. Like one call can change the outcome of the game. And that's what I hated in the front office is like just let the players play the game. And that's why I've been a proponent of instant replay. And now, this challenge that's coming, eventually going to be here, the ABS system, the automatic ball strike system. It's probably a couple years away still, unfortunately. But you can, in a key situation, challenge a call and get it overturned and, maybe impact the game in the proper way. I'm not a big human element, hey, the human element is great. Okay, well, that's costing me my job as a general manager. Right. I don't like that. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the human element is not, it's like, you do not want to be sitting there in a spot where, because a game can be a season that can be on the line, depending upon when that game is. And sometimes it's earlier than September 28th that you don't know that's the one and that's the series that mattered. You don't want to put it in the hands of umpires when you could put it in the hands of technology, because it's always going to be a little bit better. Duke, always appreciate you. Thank you again for coming on board. You can get Duke, of course, MLB Network Radio and over on SNY. You can get us and follow us on Instagram at Unfiltered with Casey Stern, YouTube channel, same thing, Unfiltered with Casey Stern, and at Casey Stern on X or Twitter, if you will, and Apple, Spotify, everywhere we get your podcasts. Unfiltered, as always, is presented by our good friends at Bet Online.